Hey guys, it is Bible Scribe again. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am doing a viewer request response video. This user actually just today asked in one of my comment sections about the time when Satan is loosed. And in the Revelation 20, it says he's loosed for a short time. And so we're going to talk through that. I don't know if it'll be very long, but I have a slide presentation to go with it. We're going to go through a little context on why this user asked the question and try to answer these two questions. I will try to answer them as best I can based on my current views and where I get that. But so this will be fun. Let's go through it together. I'll pull up the slides here, but Satan is loosed for a short time. And these are questions asked by one of my viewers today, actually, in my comment sections. So answering the questions, the two questions that were asked in this comment was, number one, how long is this little season in Revelation 20 verse 3? And that verse says, and cast him, meaning Satan, into the bottomless pit, shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. And that's the phrase that we're looking at during this video, is that little season. What does that really mean? And how can we figure it out? And then question two, which is similar and based around the same thing, but how can Satan still be loosed and around right now? And this is based on some context that we'll get as we go along, and the conflict that this viewer sees with my views. And so this is in Revelation chapter 20, verses 9 and 10. And the reason this viewer asked is because in or verse 9 rather, it says that this is the battle of Gog and Magog. It says they went up on the breadth of the earth and encompassed the camp of the saints, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. This is part of the battle of Gog and Magog. And then in the next verse, verse 10, it says, the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So in those two verses, this viewer seeing those together, is saying, well, these two verses are side by side, and so it sounds like right after this battle, Satan is cast in the lake of fire, right? And so there's a reason the viewer is asking me these questions, and that is because he has seen my other videos and some views I have on that, and I have a specific view of Revelation 20 that is directly related to this time period and when some of these things happen. The Battle of Gog and Magog I've done a video on where I try to pinpoint that, or got some new information actually in that video that I had never seen before. So I actually didn't necessarily pinpoint it in that video, but it has helped form my views after that video, some of the information I found in doing that research. So it's all about this little time that Satan is loosed, and the battle of Gog and Magog, and the time frame between all these things and when he is thrown in the lake of fire that we're going to be talking about. So for the context of my views that I think this viewer has seen in my other videos, and so I'm going to give you that quick background, just the bullet points. My views currently is that Satan was bound at the time of Christ around either 30 or 70 AD, and that Satan's binding lasted a literal 1,000 years, as it talks about in Revelation 20, verse 2. And so that would take us up until about 1030 or 1070 AD. And so he was loosed in 1070 AD. And then the Battle of Gog and Magog from Revelation 20, 8 through 10 was, I believe it probably was the siege of Jerusalem in 1095 AD. And number 5, I believe that Satan is now still alive and well, has not been thrown in the lake of fire yet, and that Satan will be thrown in the lake of fire at a future date. And in this view, the little season of Revelation 23 that my viewer is asking about would be 25 years. Assuming he was loosed in 1070 AD and then defeated in the Battle of Gog and Magog in 1095, that little season that he had could be that 25 years, right? Or if it's to the lake of fire date, then that's going to be in this next slide. Because honestly, I will admit to this viewer and to all of you watching this video that I'm still formulating my opinions on some of these final things in the book of Revelation. Uh, and I don't know, honestly, that I'll ever be able to come down 100% on one or the other and tell people, hey, this is exactly what it is. I'm not sure, honestly, that almost anybody knows that. I'm just doing my best with the information and the skill that I've been given. But I will admit that I kind of have a second possible view. That first one is not 100% in my head, but my second possibility is that Satan was loose, just as in the other view, in 1070 AD. And then the Battle of Gog and Magog, perhaps I misidentified it um, as far as the uh, Crusades and the siege of Jerusalem in 1095. Perhaps that's not the Battle of Gog and Magog. I think in my other video I did a really good job identifying some of the locales and some of the information regardless, but I will allow for the possibility that that battle has not occurred yet. It's possible. And that number 5, Satan is still alive and well, because that battle hasn't been fought, but he had been loosed. And so then number 6, that Satan would also again be thrown in the lake of fire at a future date from now. And in this view, in this possible view, which is the little season of Revelation 20 verse 3 is about 1,000 years or so, depending on how you might view that. God does often seem in prophecy to work on certain time scales. So, the year 2070 looms upon us on the horizon here, and, who knows? But I'm just saying, in this view, Satan being finally finished as far as the Battle of Gog and Magog and thrown in the lake of fire, that would be in our future. And that little season that we're going to be talking about as the answer to these questions, in this view, would be 1,000 years or so. So again, honestly, I just wanted to say, I'm just not completely 100% sure. So it's I appreciate the question, but I don't know that I'll be able to give you a definitive and tell you exactly what I think, because I'm not sure I can tell myself that. But my first view there, like I said, the Battle of Gog and Magog in 1095 in Jerusalem, I am 100% sure that I found, for instance, the Valley of Hamon Gog in that video that I did on that specifically. I would be surprised if anyone could convince me I didn't find the Valley of Hamon Gog. Now, that's not a time-based thing. That's not the event. So that second point, I did not match. I admittedly did not match every single thing in Ezekiel 38, which has to do with Gog and Magog, with the 1095 siege of Jerusalem. And honestly, that would probably be just about impossible to do, even if it was the actual event. And 1095 siege of Jerusalem was the Battle of Gog and Magog. How would I ever be able to prove that 100%? I mean, our history records they don't give that kind of detail, and they don't make that comparison. So it honestly would be almost impossible, even if it was a complete match, to make the 100% word for word matches on everything in Ezekiel 38. And the things that happened during that siege in 1095 were mind-bendingly similar to Ezekiel 38. That's part of why I lean towards that view. It's because just the historicity of what happened was such a good match for Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 20. I honestly just have to kind of lean into that a little bit. I'm not saying I 100% know that, but I think it's a good possibility. It's a very high possibility. And again, like I said, I can definitely allow for the possibility that that battle was not the Battle of Gog and Magog. I mean, it's just it's not specific enough in Scripture to know for 100% certainty. I mean, it's just not. So, and so much time has passed. Like, names are different, places are different, all this other stuff. It's just not an easy thing to do. So, I can allow for the possibility that that's not the right view. So the 1,000 years, I wanted to bring this discussion back into this video because it's critical, because I have a lot of full preterists that watch my videos. I wanted to make this note that the only reason full preterists see all of Revelation 20 as fulfilled is because these reasons, and possibly one third one, but they don't want to take the 1,000 years of Revelation 22 as literal. And why is that? I don't really understand why not, but number two, they want everything fulfilled, and that's mainly because they are full preterists, and so they're looking for everything to be fulfilled. So the only way they can do that is if they immediately write off the 1,000 years as not literal, because if it was literal, it would make them have to reassess their situation. And I suppose they may not be able to take the position of or the name full preterist if they immediately took that 1,000 years as literal. So I just honestly think that if you just read the passage with fresh eyes, that you don't naturally assume that the 1,000 years isn't literal. Why would you? It's in the narrative, and it doesn't give any indication that it's not a real number of years. And there isn't even anywhere else in the book of Revelation itself. Because if that was a common theme, like of using years and time frames that were symbolic and not real, then you would think maybe in the book of Revelation that would be supported by other precedent, but it's not. There's not any precedent in the book of Revelation for kinds of like games with years, or symbolic years that don't mean years, things like that. So the book itself doesn't help the full preterist argument in that regard at all. But another thing I'd like for people to think about is like, show me any other place in the Bible or any other prophecy in any other comparable book. I go through a lot of other books when I do my research. If you've watched any of my videos, you know this. But show me any of those books or the Bible where a prophecy time frame is given and the years are given, but they're not literal. I mean, I still haven't had any full preterist be able to do that because it doesn't exist. And then also show me any other place in the Bible or any other prophecy writing where a long time frame is given, like thousands, but it's symbolic for a short one. It's almost never, I mean, I shouldn't say almost, it is never that way. It's always, I have seen it where it's days equals time frames or weeks equals time frames. Like a small unit is given as a measure of a large unit, but never backwards. It's never backwards. Again, I challenge you, find that for me. It doesn't exist. But see, because I've read a lot of other writings, I can even do a better job than the full preterists of trying to weaken my argument. Because in the book of Adam and Eve, and it's reiterated a little bit in the Gospel of Nicodemus, there's a place where God gives a prophecy to Adam that in 5.5 days that he would bring the Redeemer to save Adam and the righteous from Hades. And of course, the Redeemer being Christ. And that 5.5 days in that prophecy is 5,500 years. But you've got to recognize still, if you still want the 1,000 years in Revelation to not be real, you have to realize, and if you think this is a correlation like this, oh, this prophecy is using thousands of years and then calling them days. Well, the problem is it goes the other direction. Again, this is backwards from the way that full preterists want to use the 1,000 years in Revelation. They want to use the 1,000 to mean like 40, or the 1,000 years to mean 3.5 or something. I don't know what they want, but that's not precedented and it's not explained. But in the passage I just mentioned to you, it actually is explained. God first gives Adam the prophecy in 5.5 days, and then Adam gets upset because he thinks he only has 5.5 days to live. But God says, no, Adam, I didn't mean literal days. This is actually in the writing. I didn't mean days, I meant 5,500 years. So he even explains the prophecy in that same passage. So this being the closest thing I've ever found to a 1,000-year reference is not the same at all as Revelation 20, where the 1,000 years is not the same at all. It's in reverse. Again, it's the thousands of years is the literal time frame, not the days. It's not the same. And for all the full preterists and other prophecy quote experts that think the 1,000 years in Revelation is not literal, you have to answer these questions. And so far, nobody has been able to do that. So, to the questions that were asked, how long is a little season? So the Greek word there used is mikros, and it's our word for micro. It's where it comes from, and it means small. It's very arbitrary. It just means small. For instance, in Revelation 6:11, the same term, mikros chronos, or little season or small time, is used to describe the time between when the Christian martyrs were killed in the first century, which at the time of the writing was probably around 60 AD or so, until God judged Israel and avenged them in 70 AD. So that's the context in Revelation 6:11, and it uses that term for this 10 to 30 year period or so, 10 or 20, 30 years, depending on exactly what time frame was meant. So there's a micros chronos that is about 10 years. And then in Hebrews 10:37, it uses micros for about this same time period of about 30 years or less. It's almost explaining the same thing between the time of the writing of the book of Hebrews and the time when Christ would come in AD 70. In 1 Corinthians 5:6, the word micros is used, and it's in this reference to leaven in bread. And we've heard that in the parables of Christ, talking about the little leaven leavens the whole loaf of bread. And so, it's a very arbitrary term, but there's just a little bit of leaven that's thrown into the bread, and it makes the bread rise. It fills the whole thing. And so I don't know. It's not a very specific term, but it does mean a little or small portion. In John 16:19, Jesus uses the word micros, or little while, to describe both the time until he was going to die from when he was talking there. And this was literally days away from when he was. And again, the time during which he'd be in the grave, that'd be 3 days. So now we've seen different uses, one with leaven and bread, which is just a small portion put into bread. Then the other is days, just a few days. The other is years, dozens of years. So we see this word small is really almost relative to the thing being talked about. It's arbitrary, it's not definite. It's kind of like saying some. Really, it's about that indefinite, really. And then this word chronos for the season in Revelation 20 verse 3 or 2 says it's the word for time, but it means a time span. So it's translated season in that passage, but it's just a time frame, and it could be small, it could be big, it could be whatever. And I wanted you to see the definition in Strong's, because it says of uncertain derivation. It's a space of time, and it's in contrast to the word kairos, which is a definite or fixed designation of time with a surrounding a special event or occasion. And this word chronos that's used in Revelation 20 can also mean a delay. It's used in that context a few different times in the scripture as well. That it just means instead of being like a time frame, it's a delay until something else. So again, this is a very kind of like loose term. So the two together, micros, chronos, it's not definite at all. And it does mean small, but that's in regards to what, really? So that's what I'm talking about in this next slide. That is, so it's a little or a small amount of time, but in comparison to what, really? Is it compared to the 40 years between 30 and 70 AD, as some of the passages we read or looked at were talking about? Is it small in comparison to the 1,000 years that it just mentioned when Satan was bound during? Because a small period compared to 1,000 years could be 100 years. I mean, that'd still be small, right? Or is it small in comparison to, say, all of prophetic history, which would be between 7 and 10,000 years? I mean, I don't necessarily think that, but I'm just saying, you know, it's so indefinite and it's relative to whatever's being talked about. So if the time frame is, thousands of years, then a small amount during that time frame could be hundreds of years or 1,000 years. It just depends on what you're talking about. So honestly, I'll just be honest. I can't answer this question yet for you. How long is a little season in Revelation 20 verse 2? I don't know for sure. I really don't, and I don't feel like I can tell you. And I don't know that anyone really can. I don't know how anyone honestly can, because there's just not that much information. So does my view of the little season being either 25 years or 1,000 years conflict with Revelation 20? I'd say not really. Not really. I mean, it's an ambiguous time frame. It's not specified. So I think we have some leeway there to try to figure out what does that little time frame look like, and little compared to what. And I really can't answer that for you. You'll have to go and answer that for yourself probably. And then question number 2 from my user was, how can Satan still be loosed? And so, his comment being that because of the verses 8 and 10, 8 and 9, I think, where the Battle of Magog is fought, and I had considered that happened in 1095 AD, and then it says in the next verse that Satan was bound and thrown in the lake of fire forever. And so, the viewer's question here saying, why isn't that, sounds like it's right one after the other. So how can you say he'd still be loosed if the battle was fought in 1095 AD? And so I would just say this, we have to realize some things when we're reading Revelation, particularly chapter 20. That the chapter and verse definitions, as with all the books of the Bible, and any paragraphs or groupings that you see when you go online to BibleHub.com or you go in your Bible, paragraphs are non-existent. They weren't in the autographs, or if they were, we didn't have them anyway. So we don't have the original separation of things. That might have actually helped us if we had the autographs and could see the paragraphing or whatever, and that would help us with some of the time frames, possibly. Still very loosely, because just a paragraph separation is not enough to denote a time frame, right? I mean, we're still making all that up. But just know that all that's not in the original necessarily. We don't have the original, so we can't see how things were separated. And the information given in Revelation 19:11 through 20:15, I would say is probably chronological, but no time frames are given except for that 1,000 years. So that's the only definite we can hang our hat on, and that is that the 1,000 years is mentioned. No other time frames are given. All we know is, like, sequentially, this thing happened, and then sometime later this thing happened, and then this thing might have happened whenever, and we don't know the whens, though. We just know that this. So we cannot infer specific time frames, or that every verse is happening right after the preceding verse. We can't assume that, like, oh, well, when it says that this happened in this verse, but the previous verse, this thing happened, we can't assume there was only like a day between them, or was there a year, or was it 10 years, or was there 100 years? We don't know. There's nothing to give us an indication of the chronology, the actual times of those, and the distance between those happenings. If you look at the passage, it just says, and this, and this, and this, and this. And it goes down all the way through that way. So there's no way we know those specific time frames. And then another comment, I think this is critical, but since it's obvious that John is getting a time-shifted journey into the future, because that's what he's doing. That's what the angels are showing him. It's future. He's in a time warp for all intents and purposes. And it starts with this 1,000 years and all the things that happened at the time of Christ, and then this 1,000 years. So we know that time is shifted way out of whack for everything he's seen. It's not like he's seeing things in time, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just he's going into the future. And so all assumptions as to when the events that he's seeing happen, they've got to be thrown out. We can't say for sure on any of it because it's like a time travel, and it's angelic, it's spiritual. It just for with specificity what times these things are happening and how far apart are they, and all that. We can't know that. And neither did John, probably, when he got the vision, because it was just probably a he'd see this thing and there was another image and then another image and another image. It's like a time warp. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but that's what was happening to John. And so it was not easy for him, but it's definitely not easy for us, and we don't know these time frames specifically. So that being said, those are the best answers I can really give. But all technical arguments aside, I wanted to say this because I still feel this when I come to this question about, is Satan still alive and active now? And when all arguments aside, at the end of the day, I just have a hard time believing that he's not active in the present day. I mean, people worship him, for heaven's sake. There's churches of Satan all over the world. Probably not as many as they would like to think they have, like us to think they have, but still, they're all over the place. And people are deceived. And this is that the reason that this is such a good indicator that Satan is alive and well is because that was Satan's job. If you watched any of my series on Satan, and I think my viewer actually did, who asked this question, if you watched my series, you saw from all the writings about Satan's place, his position, his intention, was that his whole goal was to tempt man away from God and to bring people down and cause them to do wickedness and all this thing. And the deception is potent even today. Can't you feel it? Don't you see it in people? I would say that if Satan was no longer active, no longer doing this stuff, that I don't think people would be as deceived as they are in general. And so I really have a hard time. It's like if he's not doing it, then there must be many, many, many evil spirits working in his stead because and without a leader, because they're being very effective, aren't they? I mean, people are just deceived about God and Christ and all the supernatural spiritual things of heaven. They just don't know, and it's not it still seems to me that is prevalent on earth, this deception. And then number 3, this is just know that what I'm about to say is the number one argument that futurists have against preterists, people that hold a historical viewpoint of Christ's second coming. And that is that if Satan is gone and the kingdom has already come and Jesus is not coming back again to fix things, then this world really sucks. Don't you think? And this is what futurists have said to me. I have a really good friend, he's my best friend, and he is still a futurist, and he and I get along great, but we do have a hard time discussing some of this stuff. But that's one of the things he says to me. It's like, if all that's happened, then this world really sucks. And it's sad from his perspective to think that Christ has fixed everything, or God has fixed everything, and Satan is bound and thrown in the lake of fire and gone away, but the world still sucks as bad as it does. So I'm going to leave that there. I mean, I don't need to explain anymore, but it's just, if Satan's not working on earth, then man, there's got to be some evil at work, because I see evil at work. Don't you? I just do. I'm sorry. There's too much spiritual wickedness for Satan, or at least some kind of spiritual beings, to be hard at work making all that happen because they're so successful at it, so successful. And that's not just coming from the material world, that's spiritual. Um, so anyway, that's just my kind of feelings on that. Thank you for joining me for this viewer response to my viewers' questions, and thank you to my viewer for giving me those questions. You know, I wish I could have given you a definitive answer. That's just how it is. I mean, I'll be the first to admit some of this stuff we study is hard, and this Revelation 20, you know, I've had many full preterists say to me, "Man, that passage is still hard, even though." You know, they believe it's all happened. They're still like, it's still hard to understand. So again, thank you for joining me. Like and subscribe if you're getting something out of my videos, and get the notifications when I get new videos out. Try to do, I'm at about a rate of maybe 2 a week, possibly, depending on the week. So I think you'll get something out of it if you join me. But I am on Twitter now, at Bible Scribe on Twitter. And so you can find me there, and I have my website, and I've got the link here shown to you. But you can go to all those places to reach me and stay in touch. But thank you again for the questions, and God bless.